So good morning, everyone. My name is Terrell Odom, and I'm the director in the Office for Military Affiliated Communities at the University of Chicago. Under the Office of the Provost's Equal Opportunity Programs, OMAC serves as a central hub for support, resources, and programming for the entire military affiliated community, which includes students, undergraduate, graduate, and professional studies, staff, faculty, and their families. We thank you to everyone who's joining us both remotely and in person. For those of you who are on the Zoom, I want you to know that we have taken a number of COVID-19 precautions during this event, some of which you'll see and some of which you will not. We have a limited number of people in person in our audience. All of us are wearing masks with the exception of the person, i.e. me up at the podium. We're also spread out in this auditorium in order to maintain social distancing. Now, with all the housekeeping matters out of the way, I'd like to ask all who are able to please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. I would like to now invite up our first speaker for today's program, Provost Kai Lee. Provost Lee has been a true champion in furthering the university's commitment to recruit and support the military affiliated community. And on behalf of Bridget Collier and the entire Equal Opportunity Programs team, we say thank you, Provost Lee. Kai Lee serves as the 14th Provost of the University of Chicago. As Provost, she is responsible for all academic and research programs across the university and oversees the university's budget. Provost Lee is the David Lee Schilling-Law Distinguished Service Professor in the Department of Chemistry, the James Franck Institute, the Institute for Biophysical Dynamics, and the college, and a member of the board of the University of Chicago Medical Center and the Board of Governors for Argonne National Laboratory. Prior to her appointment as provost, she served as vice provost for research, working with deans, faculty, and researchers across the university to increase access to research funding and resources, among other responsibilities. Provost Lee is an elected member of the College of Fellows of the American Institute for Medical and Biological Engineering and a fellow of the American Physical Society. Her research focus lies in membrane biophysics, and she is the co-author or author of more than 125 scholarly publications. Provost Lee joined the university in 1998 as an assistant professor in the Department of Chemistry and was appointed full professor in 2008. She has served as the Director of Materials Research, Science, and Engineering, and Center and Associate Director of the James Franck Institute, as well as the chair of Faculty Advisory Board for the Hong Kong Jockey Club, University of Chicago Academic Complex, Francis and Rose Yuen campus in Hong Kong. Her honors include being named a Searle Scholar, a David and Lucille Packard Fellow for Science and Engineering, and a Sloan Research Fellow. She was also the recipient of the Llewellyn, John, and Harriet Manchester Quantrill Award for Excellence in Undergraduate Teaching, and inaugural recipient of the Arthur Lee Kelly Prize for Exceptional Faculty Services in the Physical Sciences Department. Please join me in welcoming our Provost, Kai Lee.
Thank you, Terrell, and thank you everyone who helped to make this event possible. It is a great honor to be here today to recognize the impact of service-related injuries on veterans, military families, and caretakers, and to discuss how we can work together to provide these individuals with the resources and support that they need and deserve. As Terrell mentioned, the University of Chicago Office of Military Affiliated Communities is a dedicated resource that supports veterans and their families reflecting our deep commitment to this population. Beyond that office's many offerings, the university regularly seeks to identify new opportunities and partnerships, allowing us to better serve these integral members of our university community. In April, we joined the University of Chicago Medical Center and the U.S. Army in launching the Army Medical Department Military Civilian Trauma Team Training Program, which allows U.S. Army physicians, nurses, and medics to train at the U Chicago Medical Centers. The program gives active duty providers and enlisted Army medics an opportunity to enhance and sustain their skill set to benefit injured members. The university also recently launched the Veterans and Family Readiness Program in partnership with Blue Stars Families. This support system of network agencies, programs, services, and individuals promote the readiness and quality of life of service members and their families while pursuing academic or professional careers at the university. Today's program focuses on the impact of battlefield medicine and injuries on veterans. Since the Vietnam War, great strides have been made in treating injuries sustained on the battlefield, which means more servicemen and servicewomen are surviving the injuries and require ongoing care and support after they return home. We are deeply honored today to be joined by Sam Whitehurst, Vice President of Programs and Services at the Dixon Center for Military and Veterans Services, and a retired U.S. Army colonel. We are also joined by another retired U.S. Army colonel, Gregory Gadsden, who is an actor and public speaker. And last but not the least, our very own Dr. Kenneth Wilson, Professor of Surgery and Trauma Medical Director at U Chicago Medicine, and a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves, also joins us today. I want to thank these three veterans for their service to our country and for graciously agreeing to share their personal experiences with us this morning. Also, thank you to Jennifer Pritzker, retired U.S. Army Colonel and CEO of Talwani Enterprises Incorporated, and Pritzker Military Museum and Library for hosting us in this beautiful venue. This event would not have been possible without the many collaborative partners who work with the University of Chicago to recognize today's event. Thank you to the Veteran Exchange, the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, Blue Star Families, the Elizabeth Dole Foundation's Hidden Heroes Initiative, the Dixon Center for Military and Veteran Services, Illinois Joining Forces, the Illinois Department of Veteran Affairs, and the Jesse Brown VA Medical Center. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Stephanie Kifowit, Illinois State Representative of the 84th District. Stephanie currently serves as chairman of the Illinois House Veterans Affairs Committee. She's also a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. Stephanie, thank you for joining us today.
Good morning, everybody. It's an honor to be here today, and I would like to thank Provost Lee and Dr. Odom and the University of Chicago for hosting such an important program honoring the hurt and their heroes this week. As I said, it's an honor to be here today with these distinguished veterans on this panel. As was mentioned, my name is Stephanie Kifowit, and I began my tenure in the Illinois House Legislature in 2013. I'm the chair of the Illinois House Veterans Affairs Committee and the only woman veteran and United States Marine Corps veteran in the whole General Assembly of about 177 members. I believe that there are less than 10 members total. My recollection, I think I count about 8, but be kind to me. I turned 50 this year, and so some of my recollection might be a little bit off. But Veteran representation is so important to being there for our veterans in any situation what they have. And the state of Illinois has been a leader in veterans and supporting veterans. To give you just a quick bio, I'm also the chair of the State Government Committee, the vice chair of the Services Appropriate Committee, which is a budget committee, a member of the Revenue Committee, Public Utility Committee. As was mentioned, I am the Illinois House Speaker's appointed member to the Public-Private Partnership, Illinois Joining Forces. I'm also a governor appointee to the Governor's Challenge to Prevent Veteran Suicide. In addition to being an officer in my local American Legion Post 84, and I'm president of the Northern Illinois District 2 Women Marine Association. As you can see, I really like to do things. So I graduated from NIU with a bachelor's degree in political science, a master's in public administration. Prior to being a state representative, I was an alderman for the city of Aurora for 9.5 years. The important thing about NIU is that's where I met my husband. He's an Army veteran. He served from 1994 to 1988. We have 2 children together. My son, Sam, I just picked up yesterday from Great Lakes. He just finished his first year in the Navy. What can you do? I wanted Marines. My husband wanted Army. He picked Navy, probably not to pick sides. So he is currently on home leave. He is going to Virginia at the end of the month to finish his training. My daughter is perfectly happy being a civilian, but as luck would have it, she's involved with her boyfriend, who is a member of the Illinois National Guard. So we have quite a family dynamic. So thank you, Provost, for mentioning I served in the United States Marine Corps from 1990 to 1994. And I believe I'm the only enlisted person on this program today. I know the corpsmen's here, which our Marines really love our corpsmen. I was a corporal. I received corporal meritoriously for being Marine of the Quarter, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. I was stationed at Camp Pendleton School of Infantry, and then I was stationed in Okinawa, Japan. So if you can understand, I was a Remington Raider, I was an admin patrol, paper pusher. We made sure people got paid, supplies got where they had to be, and orders were out the door. So I was an 0151. It doesn't exist anymore. In fact, my son's orders are on his ID with the little chip on it. I said, "Where's the copy of your orders?" He goes, "Mom, they're right here." I'm like, okay. So it's amazing how things have changed from when I was in there. If Terrell would indulge me, I was going through some papers the other day, and I had this letter. If those on Zoom can see, this is actually a letter I wrote home when I was stationed in Okinawa. And she kept it all these years and gave it to me. It says, "Dear Mom, camp is fun, but I forgot my teddy bear at home. I'm really just kidding. This certainly isn't camp." I know I was so original that nobody's ever written a letter like that home when they're stationed overseas. Just so that you know, back in 1993, one of the things I wanted was the Bodyguard soundtrack with Whitney Houston. It's finally on CD. So the days and I asked for some underlined light blue jeans because the clothes at the PX just were not good. I wanted to point out in this letter something very important, though, that I'm sure our speakers appreciate as well, is that I wrote down, remember, if there's ever an emergency, the Red Cross can get a hold of me within less than a day. And I just want to take a moment of time that says, even way back in the day, the Red Cross has been doing a yeoman's job for our service members. And I want to say that when I was in, I appreciated them. And then last but not least, this is just amazing. In order to call me, if you need anything, you must dial these numbers: 011-81-988-925 111 to get the Japanese operator, and then please dial please tell them 645-2758. It's amazing now. I remember those extremely expensive telephone calls, and now with the flip of the cell phone, or you don't even flip it now, we can connect to our loved ones halfway across the world. So I just, to indulge me, I just thought that would bring a little bit of chuckle from some of the service members here in the room and on our Zoom. I served back when women were barred from really combat. I look back at my time with a different experience than the men and women who are serving today and who served in combat. And I got to be honest with you, from time to time, I have to remind myself that service is service, and that I didn't choose where I was stationed or my job, and I certainly didn't choose to be restricted from any kind of combat. And so I am always honored and humbled for individuals such as our distinguished panel today. I was 17 when I joined. I shipped out after I was 18. I didn't have children that I had to leave behind. I didn't have a marriage that I left behind and then returned back to that was significantly different than the marriage that was left. So I'm always learning. Being active in my military community, I never really, until I became a state representative, understand the gravity of the people that I was hanging with. I hung out with Howard Chittenden. He was a China Marine from World War II. He wrote a book about being a Japanese prisoner of war, but he never talked about it. Frank Foster was a Vietnam veteran who patrolled the rivers and was the only survivor when his boat hit a mine. He was catapulted onto the shore. Everybody else didn't survive. He didn't really talk about it. Finally, but certainly not least, is World War II veteran Dick Miller. He's still with us today. And he survived the sinking of the USS Drexler. And he started sharing his story of survival really when he hit 90. He's 96 now. And he really gets going after a couple old styles. So I've heard his story quite often. But to be honest, it's just humbling to be around these individuals and myself as a non-combat veteran. Really brings in perspective as a state representative that I can't really put into words that I'm trying to today. As the only female in the General Assembly, the only female veteran, the only Marine, I'm hardwired. Female veterans are hardwired a little differently than other of my female colleagues. And so that brings about, I'll be honest, sometimes a sense of loneliness and being the only one in the crowd. But I have to say that Illinois is a good state for veterans. We have a governor who just signed 7 bills recently to help our veterans. If it's just a little bit easier to get through this thing called life for our veterans, we're going to do it. If it makes it easier for spouses, we're going to do it. If it makes it easier and more support for our National Guardsmen, we're going to do it. And we have. And so I just want to say that those individuals that hang up their uniform and come back to Illinois, or those individuals that are still wearing their uniform in Illinois to our military bases throughout the state of Illinois is there for you. I'm trying to lead the charge, being one of the few. This past Friday, the governor signed a bill I introduced, the Veteran Service Ailments Task Force, which will look at what our veterans in Illinois are suffering from, pretty much what their medical ailments, what we can do as a state of Illinois. And we are going to form this task force and look at how Illinois can increase our claims for our veterans to make sure that they get the benefits that they deserve. Because getting veterans the benefits they deserve to help they make their lives again a little bit better, we're going to do it. Because I got to be honest, sometimes this life is a little effed up. And sometimes veterans get the brunt of that. And if we're not doing their claims right, if we're not there for them, not so good things can happen. And I got to say that one of the things I've dedicated is to trying to reach out to veterans and trying to make sure that they don't take their life, which is a heavy load and something we all need to be cognizant of in our everyday experiences when we're dealing with veterans. So apologize for going a little long. Last paragraph. I just want to say I appreciate the collaboration that the provost said of so many great organizations for this program. They're coming together today to have an important dialogue, and I look forward to continuing this dialogue outside this venue and throughout the year. And we need to realize that these are the very first steps, this dialogue that veterans need so that they do not feel isolated and they do not feel alone. And they realize that they believe that they belong here in the world with us, with veterans, and that we can provide a safe place for them. And that we want them to say to this world, even if it's a little effed up, that we want you to be here with us. We don't want you to leave. There are people here for you. We can reach out for you. And this dialogue will connect with so many veterans to make them realize that they're supposed to be here. And so that when the darkness comes, and it comes to every veteran, when the darkness comes, that they can hold on, weather the storm so that they can be with us throughout their days naturally, so that we can appreciate them in a manner that they need to be appreciated. And the state of Illinois is doing all they can to do that. And so with that, I again am humbled and I am honored to be here today with such a distinguished panel, with the provost, with the director, and with everybody else on Zoom. And I want to thank you for your time tuning in, and be well, be safe, wear your mask, hand sanitize, and reach out to a veteran. And if they say they're fine, they're probably lying to you, but say, I know you're going to say that, but tell me what's really happening, because that call could save a life, literally. So thank you all very much.
Thank you, Provost Lee, and thank you so much, Representative Kifowit. Correction, ma'am, there's two corpsmen in the room, the acting director and myself. So there are two enlisted personnel in the room. So I want to make sure I threw that out there. Yep. But absolutely, this is a collaborative event between several great partners here in the city and the state of Illinois, again, to bring more awareness to our service-connected veterans, their families, as well as the caregivers. In day two, we'll go directly into the documentary, A Weight of Honor, which you'll get an opportunity to meet Stephanie Howard as director and producer. And then day three, we'll go into speaking about different service providers and resources for this community. But moving on with today's program, I would now like to introduce our moderator for today's discussion, U.S. Army Colonel retired Sam Whitehurst. Colonel Whitehurst currently serves as the Vice President for Programs and Services at Dixon Center for Military and Veteran Services. Colonel Whitehurst joined the Dixon Center team in 2019 and drawn upon his 29 years in the United States Army as an infantry officer, including multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. He is now focused on ensuring that service members, military veterans, and their families each reach their full potential and successfully integrate or reintegrate back into their communities. He finished his military career as the National Director for the Army Soldier for Life program, which is where I met Colonel Whitehurst many, many years ago. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Colonel Sam Whitehurst.
Thank you. Gotta have these. No, thank you, Terrell. And it has been a really great relationship. I did have the opportunity to meet Terrell several years ago when I was still on active duty. And as anyone who's here in Chicago knows, Terrell is just an absolute human dynamo when it comes to supporting our military members, veterans, and their families. So once again, thank you very much, Terrell. Thank you. So that was a very, very nice introduction, and I won't spend too much time kind of setting the stage for today's conversation. But I do have the distinct pleasure and honor to kick off the first day of the Honoring the Hurt and Their Heroes event. Before I begin, though, I also want to make sure that I thank our fellow partners and our co-presenters in this effort. First of all, the Office of Military Affiliated Communities at the University of Chicago, which Dr. Terrell Odom leads. And like I said, Terrell is just, he's really the glue that's brought all of this together. I also like to thank the Elizabeth Dole Foundation, the Jesse Brown VA Medical Center, Blue Star Families, the University of Chicago's Veterans and Families Readiness Program, the Robert R. McCormick Foundation, the Veteran Exchange, Illinois Joining Forces, and the Illinois Department of Veteran Affairs. So I'm very excited. I think I have the best job here today because I'm very excited because I'm going to be very shortly joined by two individuals who are truly making a difference in the lives of veterans and their families, especially disabled and wounded veterans. I'm looking forward, and I know you are as well, to them sharing their stories and their thoughts and the work that they are doing. And I think all of us will find that their stories and work to be inspiring. But I also hope at the end of our conversation that you here in the audience and also you in the virtual audience have a better understanding of the part you can play in helping transform the lives of our wounded and disabled veterans and their families. So before I bring out and introduce our two guests, I would like to set the stage for our conversation this morning with a short clip from the Rick Burns documentary, Debt of Honor. This documentary examines the way in which the American government and our society as a whole have regarded disabled veterans throughout history, beginning in the aftermath of the Revolutionary War and through today's continuing conflicts in the Middle East. I encourage all to watch this important documentary. And today we do have several clips that we're going to intersperse throughout our conversation. In this very first clip, you're going to see one of our guests today, Colonel Greg Gatson, and you're also going to see the former Senator Max Cleland, who was the former senator from the state of Georgia, and also administrator in the VA. Both Colonel Gatson and Senator Cleland will describe their experiences as wounded veterans and the challenges that today's wounded veterans face. So without further ado, let's go to our first clip.
People want to know how long it took you to recover. I think I'm still recovering. You know, for 41 years, I had my legs, and so for 7, I haven't. And so I don't know that you recover from something like that in 7 years.
There is a strange and perverse news that comes out of the battlefield today. The good news is that we're, quote, saving people on the battlefield. In Vietnam, if you didn't have a head injury and you got to an aid station within an hour, you stood a 98% chance of survival. I'm in that group. It's gotten even better in Iraq and Afghanistan. The hell of it is that you're getting back much more severe casualties. They're saved on the battlefield to come back to the most uncertain future of all. And the big question mark hanging over you is that how in the hell am I going to live? How am I going to drive? Will a girl go out with me? Will they get offended by my scars? How are my parents going to react? Am I going to get a job? How in the hell am I going to make it? Those are the important questions. I had all those questions. And they're personal and they last for the rest of your life.
Now let me introduce our two guests today. Joining us is Colonel Greg Gatson, my good friend. Colonel Greg Gatson, a Chesapeake, Virginia native who served our nation in the United States Army for more than 26 years. Colonel Gadson's service culminated as the garrison commander of Fort Belvoir, where he oversaw the daily operations of a post, which is a strategic sustaining base where more than 50,000 military personnel and employees provide logistical, intelligence, medical, and administrative support, and also command and control for a mix of more than 140 commands and agencies for the Department of the Defense. Colonel Gadsden was commissioned as a second lieutenant of field artillery in 1989 from the United States Military Academy at West Point. And Colonel Gadsden has served in every major conflict of the past two decades, including Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Operation Joint Forge in Bosnia, Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, and Operation Iraqi Freedom. He is a passionate advocate for wounded warriors, veterans, and those with disabilities, sharing his experience and perspectives on several board of directors and advisory committees. Colonel Gadsden continues a very energetic and dynamic lifestyle where he continues to serve his nation as an entrepreneur and managing partner of Patriot Strategies, a government services company. He's also an accomplished photographer, artist, and remains active in cycling, skiing, skydiving, and scuba. And what Colonel Gadsden will probably not tell you is that one of his toughest assignments when he was in the Army was mentoring a battalion executive officer by the name of Major Whitehurst when Greg was a brigade executive officer in Afghanistan. I can't tell you how many times Colonel Gadsden kept me from screwing up, especially for a light infantry officer myself who couldn't spell maintenance, much less execute it. So Colonel Gadsden, my very good friend, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you very much.
And our second guest today is Colonel Ken Wilson. A native of Baltimore, Dr. Wilson is an Emory University graduate who attended medical school at Howard University. He has worked for more than a decade as a trauma and acute care surgeon for both adult and pediatric patients, including most recently at Hurley Hospital in Flint, Michigan, as the director of pediatric trauma. Colonel Wilson has a long history as a military surgeon and is currently a colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves, where he has multiple deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan. Colonel Wilson is an active researcher and has been widely published on topics including military trauma and trauma surgical outcomes. He is interested in the association between race and socioeconomic status on trauma-related health outcomes. He currently serves as director at the University of Chicago's Trauma Center. Colonel Wilson, thank you also for joining us today, and we're looking forward to hearing more about your work in the military, as well as what you're doing at the University of Chicago Medical Center.
Thank you.
Like I said, I'm very lucky the chance to lead a conversation with these two gentlemen. So gentlemen, you have seen first, and I'll start with our first question. Gentlemen, you have both seen firsthand, and in the case of Colonel Gadsden, you've directly experienced kind of the intersection between advances in battlefield medicine and our severely wounded and disabled veterans. And you've also seen the challenges that our disabled veterans and wounded veterans face. A lot of what you saw in the clip we just saw with Senator Cleland. I think you both have a very inspiring story to tell. So as part of this first part, I would like you to share more about your personal stories, what brought you to this point with the audience. And I'll start with Colonel Gadsden, then go to Colonel Wilson.
Well, again, good morning, everyone. And I just want to express my thanks and gratitude for being allowed to participate here in this panel. I see I gotta call out Sam for sneaking that in about our interaction, but it's really I was really excited to realize that you were going to be participate in this, Sam. It's an honor to be on stage with you as well as the Doc Ken here. Real briefly. I say ironically, on the night of May 7th, 2007, I was actually returning back to my base in a 4-vehicle patrol for 2 young men that had been killed 3 days earlier in an improvised explosive device. First Lieutenant Ryan Jones and Specialist Armando Sunson, his driver. And in Iraq in 2007, it was the most, I say dangerous, it was the most devastating period that I had served in a deployment. I mean, imagine just almost every single day we realize that a U.S. service member is paying with their life. And I mean, it's hard to wrap your mind around the fact that imagine you going to work every day, that somebody's not going to come home. Somebody you might know, somebody you certainly care about, somebody that's wearing that same patch on their right shirt of that U.S. flag is not going to come home. And it's that in itself in those early months of 2007 was quite a challenge. And I think I remember just as someone who's been in the Army for 17 years going, this is what it is, and we got to do our work. We're here to do a job and accomplish the mission. But this night was one of my own. One of the gentlemen, 2 gentlemen that deployed from Fort Riley, where I came from, and so it just felt a little bit more personal. It felt more personal, and I remember struggling with that evening. I mean, I just remember struggling with, was this sacrifice worth it? I mean, what these 2 young men, their lives are over. What are their families struggling with? Do they feel this was justified? And these thoughts were just heavily on my mind as I headed back to my headquarters. And, wham, that's when my vehicle was hit. The blast lifted my 15,000-pound vehicle off the road. It threw me out, ejected me out of the vehicle. And where I remember flying through the air and kind of hitting the ground and coming to a rolling stop on my back. And I knew this was serious. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I just knew I couldn't get up. I couldn't move. And I was just mad. It was actually the second time that my vehicle had been hit, but this time was obviously very differently. And I have to say that the last thing I said was, God, I don't want to die here. And I was out. My teammates would find me about 100 meters from where my vehicle stopped. I was already unconscious, lying, in a pool of my blood, where First Sergeant Frederick Johnson would put the tourniquets on my legs. No, First Sergeant Johnson would resuscitate me, and a young 19-year-old private would put the tourniquets on my legs. The fact that the doctors say saved my life. And I'll just kind of sum up here. Look, I was, as Sam said, the advancements in medical technology, if you will, have blessed me, and it made it fortunate for me to be here, because in previous wars I would not have survived. Without a doubt, I would not have survived. And so I'd be buried. I'd be a name on a wall. I'd be in a cemetery in somewhere in this country and fading off. But I'm alive. And you can say it's a problem, or you can say it's a responsibility of our country. But I'm on the roll still, and there's a cost to me and everybody that everybody has survived war. We are still paying the bill for World War II. For every veteran that's alive, we are still paying a bill that has yet to come through. And so I'll get more into what I went through, Sam. I don't want to hog the mic, but I'm alive today because we have a country that values life and is willing to put the resources, the training, and the technology into keeping us alive. I think one of the big reasons we're here is what are we doing, and what's that discussion about after saving us in investment that we will continue to make when I'm passed. Thank you, Sam.
Colonel Gatz and Greg, thank you very much. That was just incredibly inspiring. Thank you. And now let's go to Colonel Wilson.
Yeah. Greg, please, by all means, hog the mic. Your stories, your service is compelling. I think, like many of us who are not personal friends, we first saw your face on the big screen. If you ask my wife, I Google everything. And so when I Google who is this actor amongst these folks, and I saw your storied career and all that you've gone through, and being garrison commander, I was impressed. And I can't remember the year the movie came out, but I've actually followed your career at a distance since that year. And it's obviously a tremendous pleasure for me to be here next to you today. So please hog the mic. I am fascinated, like I'm sure everyone else out here in the audience is. My journey began really in 2000 when I was still a resident in Atlanta, and I looked at this tremendous bill that I would have to pay. And in 2001, I had just gotten commissioned. I was in a fellowship program up in Detroit, trying to figure out how to best do trauma. At that point in time, Detroit seemed like the place to do that. The military was not offering anything more than the reserve side than one weekend a month, and 1 month out of the 2 weeks out of the year. Well, while I was a fellow on Browning, I saw these pictures of the World Trade Center burning. And then, of course, the world changed forever. And I finished fellowship in 2003 in May and drove back to Atlanta. And there were orders the next day to go out to go to the Middle East. And I remember calling my mother, and she hung up the phone on me, hysterical, so she could go pray. And that was during the first part of the surge. And as a young captain, I was sent to Afghanistan. I guess they didn't think I was going to be skilled enough to go into to Baghdad. So we saw everything that came backwards before it flew out, and it was gunshot wounds. It was AK-47s, things that we've heard of. And being an academician, I talked about this stuff. And then there was actually an article in the Journal of New England Medicine that somewhere after 2005, you started to see wounding from these high kinetic military rounds to these improvised explosive devices. And Greg and I were talking just before we came out here. We were both in Iraq at the same time, a month apart. And people talk a lot about Baghdad, but every U.S. soldier on their way out comes through Balad. And so what he is describing to you is what I began to see in 2007 and haven't stopped seeing up until my last trip to 2020. And I when I hear the word tourniquet, I keep one in my car. What's happened in Afghanistan and what Greg is saying saved his life, it's true. It gets applied 8 miles south of here in the south side of Chicago. So that's kind of been my walk with this. I could have sat, I have 20 years. I could have sat down, but I believe what I've learned from 2007 going up to 2020 has given me a very unique skill set. And, as long as the back is still strong and as long as my wife allows me to keep going, I will keep going for the reasons that Greg is sitting here today. I feel like I have something that I can do to make a difference, get people back home.
No, thank you, Colonel Wilson. And I'm going to also echo what you just said. And I'll say this for either one of you. Both of you guys, please hog the mic today because, like I said, you both have some, not only some great stories, but just great experiences that I think translate directly to what we all could be doing to support not only veterans and their family, but supporting our communities. And I know you're doing a lot of work like that, Colonel Wilson, and what you're doing here in Chicago. I want to follow up a little bit. Colonel Gadsden talked about kind of the responsibility that we all bear. And so I want to unpack that a little bit more. But before I do, I just want to kind of share some statistics with the audience here and our virtual audience that kind of highlights what we've seen over the course of time and when it comes to advances in battlefield medicine and also our severely wounded. So I'll start when you look at the American Revolution, 40% of all casualties died of their wounds. In the Civil War, 33% of casualties. World War II is 30%, and in Vietnam, it's 23%. And then as you saw in the clip earlier, in Afghanistan, less than 9% have died of their injuries, which I think really reflect the advances that we've seen in battlefield medicine, especially in the last 50 years. And bottom line, and I think this has already been touched upon, but service members, and I think Colonel Gadsden touched upon this, service members who were seriously injured in previous conflicts would not have survived in the past, but today they are surviving, which is a great thing. That is a very good thing. But they also carry the weight of those injuries, which bring on different challenges to our wounded veterans. So this is going to lead us to our next two questions, and really the questions we all should be asking ourselves. And this touched upon what also Colonel Gadsden spoke of. What is the cost of war, and are we prepared for that cost? So I'm going to ask Colonel Gadsden and Colonel Wilson for their comments on those two questions. But before we do, I want to return to the Debt of Honor documentary and show an episode from our past, showing how wounded and disabled veterans after World War I were treated. And I would ask everyone to see if there are parallels to what happened then to what may happen as our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan I don't know if they're coming to an end. That's somewhat of a charged comment, but as they are drawing down, is there potential to see similar parallels? So if we could we go to clip number 2?
In the progressive era, the view of the disabled soldier changed. They thought, we can just fix this. We don't have to see it anymore. This was also the time where there were laws called the ugly laws. This was the time of eugenics. This is a time when you could actually be fined if you were somehow deformed or defective for being on the street. Now, veterans had pins that they would get, so you would know that is a legitimate deficiency. Someone who doesn't have the pin doesn't have a legitimate deficiency and could be fined or arrested. But the ultimate goal, the real push, was to make it so that we would not see the human cost of war, that the civilian population would not see the cost of war. Because if the cost of war is somehow hidden or not shown or smoothed over, the stakes don't seem to be as high.
So the person that you heard in the background of that clip speaking was Beth Linker, who's associate professor at the University of Pennsylvania. And as you saw in that clip, she kind of directly tackled that idea of the cost of war and us as a society keeping our wounded and disabled veterans at the forefront, even as conflicts end over time. So going back to those questions, the cost of war, especially the cost of war when we talk about our wounded veterans, and are we adequately prepared for that cost? Are we prepared to support our wounded veterans? I'd like both Colonel Gatz and Colonel Wilson. Have we as a country learned the lesson from previous conflicts? Or do we continue to make the same mistakes? Are we thinking less and less of our wounded, disabled veterans as the war fades from our collective memory? And I'll start with Colonel Gadsden.
Thanks again, Sam. I think I'd like to kind of maybe draw on 2 points. I think the clip is very profound from the standpoint of are we truly as a society ready to pay the cost of war? And so I make my first point is really about I say our Congress and how we in America hold our leadership accountable. We do through the vote. The last time that United States Congress has declared war was in World War II. And so you could argue, or you might at least make a case or discussion to say, has our Congress deferred their responsibility in declaring war and all the things that go along with it, the before, the during, and the after, the resources to hold our society accountable to this cost. When our VAs fall in a state of disrepair because we don't have enough in the budget for them, isn't that a dereliction of our responsibility? And how are we as a society holding them accountable? And so I think that's a challenge. But I think nationally too as well, I've learned in this journey that, after Vietnam, we as a nation said, look, we cannot get ourselves bogged down in these long counterinsurgency wars, these ones that are very difficult, if not impossible, to win. And some of the strategic decisions that we made was we got rid of our rehab facilities in the Department of Defense. We are not going to get involved in long wars, so we don't need these rehab centers. Well, guess what? We not only got involved with one, but we had two, and we didn't have the rehab centers to deal with this. So, in 2007, many might recall, Walter Reed ending up on the front page, and the political fallout that was associated, because we literally had service members busting out of the seams of hospitals that didn't have rehab facilities because we weren't supposed to be in these kind of wars. And so, so there's some introspection that we have across across elements of our government, and really how we as voters hold our elected leaders accountable. I mean, if we're patriotic Americans and we want them to do the right thing, then we ought to be holding their feet to the fire. People, the number one question that I face is our VA taking care of me? Are you getting good care from the VA? Well, quite honestly, I say you need to be asking that question. Not me. You need to be asking that question and finding the answer, and then holding them accountable. But that's my take on it, Sam.
No, thank you, Greg. And Colonel Wilson.
Colonel, I just want to make sure I have both questions. One was the costs, and the second part of that question was,
Are we prepared as a society? So as we saw after World War I, as an example, obviously weren't prepared. And I think many Americans would say, we've kind of learned that lesson, right? And, we're prepared for stuff, but I think, as Colonel Gatson pointed out, Iraq and Afghanistan, as the wounded started to return from there, we weren't prepared, as we saw what happened at Walter Reed Hospital in 2007. And that's just, obviously that was some significant challenges, but that was just a symptom of a larger issue. So as we look toward the future, have we learned that lesson, and will we be prepared for the next conflict?
well, I'll answer that question first, and the cost one second. One of the things, at least from a medical standpoint, there's an alarming article, I think, in U.S. News World Report, that if we actually got in a true peer-to-peer war, and I'm definitely not downplaying being Iraq and Afghanistan, as Colonel Gatson mentioned, people risk their lives. But if we got into war with someone else who had true air support, someone that could stop our evacuating people to Germany, would we be prepared? And the answer is no. And that survey came from the medical community, that we would not be able to handle the mass casualties that would happen if we actually faced North Korea or the Soviet Union. And my last mobilization, which was in Herat, which when we look at the news, which fell probably like 3 weeks ago, and we were out in the middle of nowhere, right across from Iran, waiting for the river to dry so the Taliban come back across. And I was there as the river was drying. And the medical side was so drawn down that we're no longer even in the hospital. Like what Greg and I mentioned, being at Balad, which was a tent city at the time. It was 107 degrees when you came through that tent, by the way. So who knows if you have a fever or not. So in that place. But now I'm not even in a tent. I'm actually out on patrol with a bunch of 19-year-old special operators at 50. And I keep telling people, it's like it's asking the place kicker to make a tackle, right? So if I got a gun as a surgeon and I got special forces guys, if you get through them, I'm done. Now I have to come back and try to find my replacement who's 20 and say, hey, join the Army. Well, tell me your experience. Tell me about your hospital experience. Well, I wasn't in a hospital. I was burning trash and other things out in a tent on the border, getting rocketed every day. So we're not really prepared for that, at least if you look at it from a medical standpoint. And the other cost that I will talk about is Colonel Gasson described being in that vehicle. The other injuries that you don't see is that when that engine block comes up, it's a burn. it's a blast for the people who are in the Navy, right? A blast underwater is much more dangerous than a blast in the open air. So you're in a vehicle, so you have a head injury, traumatic brain injury, which is huge right now. And we have more people dying from not being able to get their chemistry straight in their head from that concussive injury, and the suicide rates are through the roof. So back in, in the clip that you showed in the black and white, we probably called that shell shock syndrome. Just had a different name. Now we call it PTSD. I'm sure it'll be called something in the next conflict. So I don't think we've fixed that cost. What does it mean when people come home and they can't sustain a job? They're committing suicide. They can't stay married. Their families are broken. So I think we're ill prepared, and I think that is a cost and not a financial. Well, I guess that if you're seeing the physician for your head injury, I guess that is a financial cost to the community. But I'm more concerned about the cost it is to the individual than it is a financial cost. But I think that is a significant cost for the U.S. veteran.
Sam, if I could,
Please.
what Dr. Wilson just said is it's really an exponential cost. I mean, when you talk about employment, when you talk about the secondary, tertiary effects of a service member and their family, and them kind of falling off the cliff because that support's not there, it doesn't just end with that service member, and so. It is really hard. I mean, how do you wrap your mind around whether we're prepared if you don't really understand the cost?
That's a great point. And I would just add, this conversation, we're really centered on the disabled veteran, the wounded veteran. But, Greg, as you just laid out, there are other, it's not just the veteran. There's the caregiver. Who's the person who's going to care for that veteran who's been significantly wounded, and the family kind of standing behind and standing around that wounded veteran as well. And I know tomorrow we're going to watch a documentary about military caregivers, and I'll talk more about that at the end of our conversation today. But again, just when we talk about the costs, it's just not the veteran or the person who's been wounded or disabled. There's a community that has to bear that cost, and that's something important to keep in mind. And I want Colonel Wilson, I wanted to follow up on your point when you were kind of talking about in terms of the medical community being prepared. One of the things I found interesting is preparing for today's discussion is that, when you look back at a certain period like World War II, where there was these tremendous advances in battlefield medicine, being able to treat infection, being able to do blood transfusions, being able to rapidly get people off the battlefield. So that was one of those turning points in medicine where we really saw, the survival rate really start to tick up very significantly. But there were still gaps. And what that did was really expose other gaps. Like while we saw tremendous advances there, we didn't see advances in psychiatry and dealing with kind of the mental and the emotional toll of those significant injuries until the Vietnam War. We started having those discussions. So looking at that period in history, as we look forward, what are other gaps that you see, along with the ones that you highlight, but what are other gaps that we're not realizing as a country when it comes to treating those who've been through some type of trauma or severely wounded?
Well, again, I think Greg's probably going to have the better answer for you, but having to follow people from point of injury, knowing that it's a burn, it's a traumatic brain injury, it's an amputation, it's sepsis from when that blast happens, it hypersonically puts debris in the soil into the body. So what I think happens for those who come back, there's two things. There's two ways of looking at this. If you look at it on the civilian side, someone gets an amputation on the south side of Chicago, right? What prosthetic are they going to get? Are they going to get a prosthetic? In the Army, you're going to get a prosthetic potentially, but if it's too high or too low, you may not be able to fit a prosthetic. When you get to a certain age, walking with a prosthetic increases, heart disease. So what happens when you're no longer 20, but now you're 65? You have other health concerns that are part of your comorbidity list that did not exist before the injury. And that is a financial cost to them. But and again, I can't downplay this, and I know I already mentioned it, but I can't downplay the psychiatric problems that occur from just that loss of function.
What about, well, that's an interesting point. What about the psychiatric impacts or the emotional toll that it has on providers, on the doctors and other medical support personnel? Because I think they sometimes get lost in this conversation. When we talk about the psychological toll that these can take, we again, rightfully so, we focus on the wounded veteran or wounded service member. What about the doctors and the nurses and the other support personnel? The toll it has on them.
You're the first person in almost 20 years you've actually asked me that. And I will never downplay the importance of the people who actually go outside the wire, the trigger pullers. But you have to understand also, as I mentioned in Balad, you see, if during your duty, you see every single injury that comes home because it has to get on the big plane to fly. And the further you go out into the countryside, you see it raw. And you smell it, you live it, and you relive it. And you're also being rocketed and shot at. You come back home and someone dropping a tray of instruments sounds like something else. Because in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan, they're old countries. So the people who are shooting at you occupy the high ground. So there's no whistle of something going up in the air and coming down like a firecracker. It's just coming right down at you. And so you only hear the incoming alarm go off when it actually hits the ground. Well, obviously, it's too late for that. We lost a nurse. The nurse who slept from me to you went out to mail a letter to his kids. Gone. I was there for 5 months. He was there for 5 weeks. We've had, all clears after rockets, and you open the door, and then someone's bringing in their buddies, and they're dying right there in front of you. And then you do what I think most of us do in today's social media. You learn something about them. And, I can think of one in particular that one of my great friends, he and I still lament that day when this kid, we got him so close and we couldn't get him back. And, we reached out to his wife, and his chaplain told us that this kid had adopted his cousins because his cousins were addicted to his cousins' kids because his cousins were addicted to crystal meth. And he was in Sunday school every day. You wear that, and there's almost a survivor's guilt that I got you this close and I couldn't get you back. So yeah, I think for the medical community, again, we don't have the anxiety of kicking in a door and worrying about what's around the door, but we do have to understand we are outside the hospital. I feed my family with my hands. Now you have me out being mortared and shot at. If I lose my hand, how do I feed my wife? How do I explain that? Coming back to University of Chicago, do I have my job? So yeah, we are definitely impacted by the PTSD and everything else everyone else goes through.
Sam, if I could add, just probably a handful of months ago, Captain Ross Witter, now Colonel Ross Witter, the 5th Corps Division Surgeon at Fort Knox, I actually had a chance to talk to him. He was one of the initial triage guys right before I even got to the cache that prepared to put me on the medevac. And he literally shared with me that he still has nightmares about me, literally about me. And one of the things he said that stuck with me, we were, our brigade combat team was there for 15 months straight. And he said, he couldn't count how many people he saw come in like me. And he said, I was the only one to survive. And I was wondering why he was still having nightmares about that. And so it really is. You look, we talk to him. I talk to people along my journey because I have no memories. And you're trying to put this puzzle together. So, you're asking why you're, because it's a big chunk. It's a chunk of my life that I can't recall. And so that's, I was fortunate. I mean, there's so many other men and women that don't have the, the connections, or just being able to kind of be able to run the folks down that they were able to, that were part of their journey. And then I did want to this cost. So look, I'm a type 2 diabetic. Would I have become one? I don't know, but my my acceleration to that comorbidity was accelerated by the loss of my legs. And so again, this is another part of the cost that that we're faced with. And I think as a little bit of a personal journey, I was ready to give up. Like I was ready to give up. January of 2020, I weighed 270 pounds. My A1C was going the wrong way. It was almost 9. And I just thought that that this was just the way it was going to be. But I got some good news that my son and his wife were pregnant, and eventually I found out I was going to be a grandfather of twin boys. So in 2019, I'm sorry, in 2019 I was diagnosed with diabetes. In 2020, my A1C was I was 270 pounds, and I just said, look, I want to be a grandfather. So during COVID, I cut about 60 pounds. I got my A1C back down to normal because I want to see my grandkids. Look, this stuff is really complicated. I know how close I was to just kind of giving up because it's hard. I mean, like, if I had my legs, I'd be running around. It would be years before I would be dealing with diabetes, put it that way. My doctor even gave me an attaboy that I held it off for 7 years, plus being pre-diabetic. So it meant that I was trying to do the right thing, but this accelerated it. And there's a lot of things that people cannot see. Burn victims cannot regulate their body temperatures. So they may have all their parts, but they just can't go out and run like they want to run because their bodies can't cool. Well, if you don't run, you don't burn fuel. If you don't eat right, these kind of things sneak in. So anyway, it's a lot more complicated than even I think we appreciate and understand. Again, this journey is not over. Sorry, Sam.
No, that was powerful. And I do want to play this. I have a third clip from the documentary that I want to play where Colonel Gadsden, Greg, is kind of describing kind of his aftermath after being wounded. I'm not quite sure how to follow it up after what you just laid out to us. So I was going to ask you to comment on it, but I still want to show the clip, and then I'll let you make any comments to add
Sorry
to that.
about that. I tell you, mess you up there.
Oh no, that was great. So if we could, this is our third and our last clip from the Debt of Honor that we're going to show, and this puts a spotlight on some of the challenges that Colonel Gadsden was dealing with when he returned from being wounded, returned back from deployment. Can we roll the third clip?
As a double amputee, a lot of times people assume incorrectly that my physical injuries overrode my mental and emotional injuries. But, I've often said that my emotional injuries took a lot longer to heal than my physical injuries. When I came back from Iraq in May of 2007, my unit was still in Iraq. And I was very, I think, isolated, almost like a person that didn't have a country. And even though my family was there for me, that wasn't where I wanted to be. I have never had an experience like that. I mean, it was very empty, I had never come home without being with my unit. And it was very difficult to deal with.
No, that I want to make sure we highlighted that because that really resonated with me. That idea of the loss of camaraderie, and I don't think a lot of people understand that the bonds that you develop with your unit when you're deployed or just in training. You don't have to be deployed. Those bonds are incredible. And so I didn't know if you wanted to comment anything on that, Greg.
Right. It really is, Sam, it's really a reminder of, I can remember after I gotten out of the intensive care, just, I'm on Ward 57, and every day I wake up wondering if this is some bad dream that won't end. I slowly open my eyes, wondering if I'm going to see my legs there or not. But I felt like I abandoned my soldiers. I mean, I got blown up, but I felt like I abandoned them. And it doesn't logically make sense, I know. But look, I guess I fought. I was like, I'm not done. And so I stayed on active duty for 7+ years after being wounded. That's less than 1% of us that suffer these kind of wounds stay on active duty. And so they go home, they get separated. And they had some of the same feelings, like they did something wrong, like they abandoned their brothers and sisters. My soldiers felt like they let me down. So when I went back to Fort Riley 15 months later to see them when they got back, it was just, there's emotion. And some guys, so many folks don't get to close that loop. And even if they get to close that loop, it's not always enough. It can take years. I mean, these things are buried. They're survival mechanisms so that you can kind of function in life. So it's just looking in that clip, Sam, brings back some emotions that I'm not afraid of them, but it's not something I like to open the cupboard for and look at every day. But not everybody is that fortunate. Not everybody, you call it a blessing. I was 41. I mean, I had quite a few years of life under me to kind of put this in perspective. I mean, you think of an 18, 19, 20-year-old. I always said I would not want to be in their shoes. I don't know if I could have done it.
No, Greg, thank you very much. And I would just like to add, and this kind of goes back kind of understanding the lessons learned, during the surge of Iraq and Afghanistan, we had a lot of wounded service members returning home. And there was, and one of the things we tried to do as a military was create places for them to go where they can continue to receive treatment. Warrior transition units, a place where they go that they could kind of call home. But what I discovered, and I think many discovered, is even though with all the good intentions we did things like that, all we did was separate them from their unit. And so as we look toward the future, I hope that we are kind of going back and taking a hard look at some things that we did, we thought were doing the right thing, but when you step back, you realize that maybe there were some there are some consequences to that we didn't take into account. And I think what you just highlighted, Colonel Gadsden, is a great example of that. So we're nearing the end of our conversation, but before we go, I would be remiss, especially in light of recent events, what is happening in Afghanistan. I did want to, I mean, all three of us up here are veterans of the war in Afghanistan. And I wanted our two guests the opportunity to comment about what's happening in Afghanistan and really just share your thoughts. It's whatever it is, just share your thoughts with the audience about Afghanistan and kind of what you've seen here recently. And Colonel Wilson, I'll start with you.
So Afghanistan 4 times, first 2 times very violent, and the accuracy of the things being fired at us. If we were blackout fob, so in other words, for those of you who don't know, it's like trying to see this curtain at night. So sometimes missiles flew over us and hit the village next to us, and we would get casualties coming in, children, civilians. And once we had those children on post, the rockets would stop, and I almost called it medical warfare because we're taking care of their citizens and children, women, soldiers. I started a shoe drive in one of those, and I don't know, and I don't know what it is about not having access to many things over there, but the women in those villages could find and identify a very expensive shoe with a heel and wear it on rocks and be very graceful. And as you can imagine, as we would get boxes of shoes, it was, I didn't have kids at that time, so I would just kind of size them and hold them up. And in that culture, unfortunately, which I worry about now that we're out, that the men still speak for the women. We were always taught that there's no respect, and if you talk to the women, you're going to, somehow be beheaded. And so since these shoes were in short supply and everyone wanted them, and someone would point behind a burqa at these shoes and they would say, well, they want those shoes. Through the interpreters. And I would say, well, everybody wants these shoes. I have to see a smile for these shoes. And the mask would come down and they would smile because everyone knew it was funny, including, their male counterparts. So for me, it demystified that everybody wants to kill you over there. Right, we were family, and I found the Pashtun culture to be very engaging. If you were my friend, you were my friend. We were fed by them. Girls started going to school in those villages because, like I said, in the Army, we're way out in the villages. And so now, for me, after 20 years of those experiences, and being in Herat, in Kandahar, and I could go around south, north, east. I was all over. And to know that those villages are now overrun, those experiences are gone, and they went so quickly. There's no one to take care of those people from a medical standpoint. I'm very sad. We knew it was fragile when we were there. We knew, as Colonel Gadsden mentioned, unless you're going to stay, you can't make a permanent change. And obviously we all had to come home, but it makes me very sad. And I'd like to go back and do what I did before, but I know that's not going to happen. So I'm heartbroken.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Colonel Wilson. Greg?
Well, I would echo, Colonel Wilson's sentiments in terms of it is just sad. We can search our soul for what's the right answer, and there are probably really no great answers. But I think in a lot of ways, Sam, this kind of comes back to, one of our original questions there this morning is about accountability. Many could argue that we should have never gone because it was a counterinsurgency. Was it a winnable war? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But but we made that decision. And so I think we sort of adopted this country. We now owned it. And so again, we're making a decision to walk away. And again, who's accountable? You know, a few weeks ago, I met a Gold Star mother who lost her son in Afghanistan in 2010. What do we say? I mean, what do we say to these folks that have made sacrifice and we're just walking away like it's a car we don't want anymore? I don't like the taste that it leaves in my mouth. That's me personally. This is not a political statement, but I don't like that taste. You know, I've got soldiers that I left behind there in Afghanistan. Master Sergeant Banks and Master Sergeant Matos. And so but you know, it's not anything Greg Gatson can do about it. But you know, I just hope that we can learn and be better in the future.
No, gentlemen, both of you, thank you for your comments. And I would just add, just like both Colonel Gatson and Colonel Wilson, a lot of my thoughts are to the families of our fallen from Afghanistan. And I would encourage everyone to read. The Commandant of the Marine Corps issued a letter to all of his Marines. But you know, I'm a soldier, and this is the only time I'll ever give credit to the Marine Corps. But I encourage everyone, find that, you know, Google it, take a look at the letter that he issued out to the Marine Corps to kind of talking about about Afghanistan. I found it very powerful, and is something that has stuck with me, and so I encourage everyone to read that. So now I think we have a few minutes. I'm getting the sign. We have 6 minutes for any questions. I don't know if we've gotten any virtually. We could start there, and then we could see if anyone has any questions here in the audience who are with us live.
Yes, sir. Okay, this is on. So we have a couple of questions here in the chat. First is a statement that I'll read to all three of the colonels on the stage. We are indebted to you all for your service to our country that continues to this day. There are no words to sufficiently express our deep gratitude and respect. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us today. So that's from one of the anonymous attendees. But there's a question here that I want to pose to both Colonels Wilson as well as Colonel Gatson. How can everyday citizens support our wounded veterans, their families, and caregivers?
Well, thank you for the question. I think my answer is simple. Maybe not always easily executed, but I say as a citizen, we have our time, our talents, and our resources. I mean, every one of our service members comes from a community just like we're in now. You know, we're no different. We're not superheroes. We sign up, we raise our right hand, and whether we wear the uniform for 3 years or 30 years, we eventually take it off and we eventually return back to our communities. And so my suggestion is that you find an organization and tie it and become passionate about it, again, with your time, your talents, and or your resources, because they will matter and they can make a difference. And we all have an opportunity to do one of those three.
Thank you, sir.
You want to answer? I'll say this very quickly: is leave the politics out of it when you talk to a vet. You know, we span the continuum of folks. But one thing that we do share is the experience. And you can't dictate to us because of your media of choice as to how we should think or feel. Just listen. And obviously I'm not going to answer what support you give. I think Colonel Gatson is going to be able to answer that a lot better than I would when you're physically harmed. But there are emotional scars, and we don't really necessarily need to hear what you think, how we should think.
No, I would just add, there's this perception that veterans are kind of this monolithic kind of demographic. And what we always try to stress is veterans come from every part of society, every facet of our country, every part of our country. And so Colonel Wilson is exactly right. We're not some alien race. We are part of our country, every part of our country. And so I think that's a great point. Thanks for bringing that up.
So I think we have time for one more, sirs. Given advancements in medical care and invisible wounds of war, do you think there are to be restrictions on how many combat deployments or peacekeeping operations that service members and reservists can be activated to support?
My wife would say yes.
Well, look, I'm not a clinician or I don't have a medical background. I could say I stayed in the Holiday Inn Express, but I didn't stay in that one either. I think the answer to that is really it's a function of our personal resiliency. There's no full meter or I mean, you can measure folks, I guess, prior to a deployment and measure them afterward. And but I think our resiliency is a function to me on how we live our lives and how we grow. And I don't know that I personally reached my zenith in terms of what I could handle. But at the same time, I would dare not apply that or assume that on anyone else. So what I would recommend we do is that we continue to build and focus on our personal resiliency, but that we also measure, pre and post deployment, and really make an assessment on whether someone's reached their limit, if that's possible.
Yeah, there are three of us in this little semi-arc here who have, I guess because of the movie, I know you were in Hawaii. And some of you still have 808 area codes. And my wife and I spent time in Hawaii before I came to the south side of Chicago. And there was an opportunity to stay in Chicago and eat avocados fresh off of, the trees and watch the sunset every day. And I would have been miserable because I wanted to do the south side of Chicago trauma, and I am still not miserable. And if you take that away from me, I would be miserable. So I would imagine it's the same for many vets. I remember one time, and I'll try to make this really quick for the sake of time, 3 young women about the same size, blast hits, throws them into a Jersey barrier. And of course, we're all about traumatic brain injury at this point in time. And we sent them to TBI tent. That's all we had, which is a quiet place you have to sit still. One young lady didn't want to go to the tent because it was her birthday. She wanted to party. Now, I don't know how you can party in Afghanistan. I didn't ask. But as the deputy clinical commander said, okay, she's fine. Second young lady still had ringing in her ears. She did a day in the traumatic tent and then went back to duty. The third one couldn't leave the tent and had to be evacuated all the way back home. So 3 women, same size, same blast, 3 different responses to the same blast. So you really have to kind of screen very closely. Because like I said, if you asked me to go back to Afghanistan tomorrow, I would go tomorrow. Sorry, Provost Lee, I would probably leave. Sorry, Nicole, but I would go tomorrow.
No, thank you. And I think that kind of brings us to the end today. Well, first of all, I do want to thank our two guests today, Colonel Greg Gadsden and Colonel Ken Wilson. Thank you for your service. Thank you for what you are continuing to do for veterans and their families, and for community, not necessarily for civilian communities like what Colonel Wilson's doing here in Chicago. So thank you for what you're doing. And please, everyone, if you could join me in a round of applause and thank them for their comments. And I would like to add, I encourage everyone, this is going to conclude the first day of our event. I encourage everyone to please register for day 2 and for day 3 tomorrow. We are going to screen a documentary called The Weight of Honor. It is an award-winning documentary that profiles the lives and challenges and obstacles that military caregivers face. It follows the families of veterans who've been significantly wounded either in Iraq or Afghanistan, and then their caregivers and how they deal with those challenges over the course of 5 years. So it's incredibly comprehensive. I've seen the movie several times, and I'll tell you, every time I watch it, it gets me emotionally. It's that powerful. So I encourage everyone to register to watch that tomorrow. And then after that, we'll have a discussion with the producer and the director, Stephanie Howard, of the documentary. So I'm really looking forward to that. And then on the last day, we have several of the organizations that are part of this event. They're going to share some of the resources that they have and the work that they're doing to support our disabled and wounded veterans and to support caregivers as well. So if you're an organization or your community and you sometimes struggle with how can I help those in my community, veterans, their families who are in my community, I encourage you to please register for day 3 so you can see. You'll see some tools that you can use, some organizations who are out there to help. So please register for day 2 and day 3. So Terrell, anything I left out or? Okay. Once again, I want to thank everyone for joining us in the first day of honoring the hurt and their heroes. And I want to make sure that a special call out to the support staff here, the Pritzker Military Museum and Library. That's just been exceptional. So all the folks behind the scenes who are making this happen, I want to thank them because they've been absolutely incredibly supportive and really appreciate their contributions to this. So look forward to seeing everyone again tomorrow and also on Thursday. Thank you.